Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, welcome to Geneva for this special WADA Independent Commission press conference. Welcome as well to our many media worldwide dialing in via conference call. My name is Ben Nichols. I'm the Senior Media Relations and Communications Manager for the World Anti-Doping Agency, and I'll be the MC for today's press conference session. Almost a year ago, a series of very serious doping allegations were first raised on German television channel ARD. Soon after that, the WADA president, Sir Craig Reedy, announced that a full and thorough inquiry would be conducted. The founding president of the World Anti-Doping Agency, Mr. Dick Pound, was announced as the chair of that commission. And Dick is here with us today in the center of the head table, so a warm welcome to the chair of the Independent Commission. The second member of the Independent Commission announced was Professor Richard McLaren. Professor McLaren is an experienced legal counsel with much experience in the world of international sports law. He has also conducted a number of investigations in the world of professional sport. He's a long-standing member of the Court of Arbitration for Sport as well. So welcome to Professor McLaren on my far side of the head table. And the final member of the Commission is Mr. Günter Younger. Günter is a former member of Interpol and Europol with broad experience in the law enforcement industry. He is the criminal director of the Bavarian Criminal State Police. So welcome to Günter Younger on my near side. And of course, we are here today because the Independent Commission has concluded its initial investigations. And so at this time, I would like to hand over to the chair of the Commission, Dick Pound, to take us through the findings. Over to you, Dick.
Thank you. Is this mic on? All right. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming to this occasion. And for those of you participating by phone, good morning or good evening. I'd like to thank all of the members of the media for their understanding that the Commission would not be issuing interim reports. And you were very good about not pursuing that line of inquiry, and thank you very much. The plan here is to make some general remarks and then attempt to answer any questions you may have. We've started a bit late so that you can practice your speed reading and have a look at the summary of conclusions and recommendations that we've made. You've heard the introduction of the members, and I must say, as chair of the Independent Commission, I want to thank them for their enormous assistance. The background that Richard McLaren has in terms of investigations, broad understanding of the law, and a particular understanding of the appeal process and burdens in the Court of Arbitrations for Sport, in case any of these matters get there. And for Günter Younger, who's done an absolutely splendid professional job in supervising the investigation and actually taking part in it, we would not have been able to make as much progress as we have in such a short time without his professionalism. And through him, I'd like to thank his superior officers for lending him to us for this period of time. And having seen him at work, I know why they're anxious to get him back in the field. So here we are. The report, as you've probably been told, has now been posted on the WADA website in its entirety. And I hope you've had a chance to have at least a quick diagonal read of the first chapter of it, which is a summary of the findings and conclusions that we've reached, as well as the recommendations that we're going to make. We're very pleased that WADA has agreed with us that it should be the Commission itself that releases its report, even though it is a report to WADA. And this is something that has been pleasing to us because it means that unlike in certain other cases, this report will make its way into the public domain. Since we are a commission established by WADA, we communicated the report to WADA last Thursday, very late last Thursday, Canadian time, to enable WADA to be able to arrange to put the report on the website, and as a matter of courtesy to allow it to consider whatever position it may wish to take with respect to the report. I should say that WADA was not given the opportunity to comment on the contents of the report, and no other persons or organizations were given the opportunity to see or to comment on the report before its release. The immediate cause of the creation of the commission was, as was mentioned by Ben, a documentary shown on the German television network ARD in December of last year. And the broad lines of our investigation are outlined in Chapter 2 of our report. The allegations were very serious, and as mentioned, the WADA president immediately announced the formation of an independent commission. We met to settle on the terms of reference and to design a plan of investigation, including the selection of an investigative team to conduct the investigation itself under the overall supervision of the Commission. The terms of reference, and it's important to keep this in mind as we go through the process today, were essentially limited to athletics and to Russia, not to other sports and not to other countries. We will not bore you with the details of our investigation, other than to say that we are satisfied that it was thorough and that it was conducted by experts. The investigation was also conducted on the basis of a compressed timetable, since we believe that lengthy delays in coming to a report were not in the best interests of sport or the organizations or the individuals involved. You will note, if you've already skimmed the report on the website or in the handout that was made available to you, that there are two portions of it that are not yet made public. The first is the chapter on the IAAF. As the investigation went on, we discovered information that not only related to sport corruption in the general sense of it, but also to possible criminal actions as well. And that portion, including the facts and documents that we had in our possession, has been turned over to Interpol for investigation, for review rather, and the possible reference to the appropriate authorities in one or more countries. In fact, WADA has negotiated a cooperation agreement with Interpol, and with that framework made it fairly easy for us to initiate that contact. After reviewing it, the Interpol authorities referred us to the French authorities, and the French authorities have agreed to take up the matter, and they are in the process of making their investigations. There will be a decision by the criminal authorities as to whether or not there will be a prosecution. And once that decision is made, it's our plan to release the entire report, including the materials that we made available to the French authorities. So we're not going to take any questions on that aspect of the investigation, just so that we don't compromise any work that may still be underway. But we do, however, expect to release that portion of the report not later than the end of this year. Incidentally, many of you have been made aware of a leak of certain aspects of that investigation. Just so that you're aware, that leak did not come from our commission, and it did not come from WADA. I believe the French have already made a statement on that, And our understanding is that Interpol will be releasing its own statement either during the course of this press conference or immediately after. The second portion that's not there deals with the allegations made also by ARD and other media outlets in August of this year regarding suspicious test results that may or may not have been diligently pursued by the IAAF. The terms of reference of our commission were extended to deal with those allegations as well. Now, in that, there are lots of data to be analyzed. The list involved several thousand athletes, so that is being done as we speak by our experts. The analysis has not yet been completed, but we expect that also to be finished and reported on prior to the end of the calendar year. To cut to the chase then, in some, overwhelming portions of the allegations made on the ARD program have been found by the Independent Commission to be true. We want to congratulate the reporter who put it together, Haya Seppelt, and ARD on a very fine piece of investigative journalism, which has led to this unique opportunity to make some significant progress in the fight against doping in sport. The Commission also wants to congratulate the individuals who were courageous enough to be whistleblowers in this matter, despite them knowing that the usual outcome, at least initially, would be attacks on their character, their truthfulness, and even their loyalty. We need, and the Independent Commission will urge WADA, among others, to find more and better ways to enable such persons to come forward and to provide information that will contribute to the integrity of sport without the risk of retaliation and concerns for their personal safety. One of the feedbacks that we get from potential whistleblowers is they say, what's the point? Nothing will happen, even if we come forward with this information. Well, for those of you out there who think there will be no results from speaking out, you can see what has already happened, and you can imagine what is going to happen in future. Let me now describe some of the outcomes of the work of the Commission over the past few months. We have provided WADA with a number of sanction packages on individuals who had not previously been identified. We have delivered those to WADA, who have turned them over to the Russian Athletics Federation for treatment as is required under their rules. We have identified possible criminal violations, and as I mentioned, have reported those. We've identified a number of suspicious cases and brought the facts and the identities of the persons involved to the attention of the proper authorities. We have made findings and recommendations regarding the Moscow laboratory and the Russian NATO, RUSADA. We have reported on interference with doping controls on many occasions, not just in the past, but up to and including the middle of this year, well after it was known that this investigation was underway. We have found cover-ups, we found destruction of samples in the laboratories, we found payments of money in order to conceal doping tests, among others. The report, as you get a chance to read it, consists of various sections dealing with the facts, the findings and the conclusions of the Commission, and a series of recommendations directed at various organizations, including the World Anti-Doping Agency. The facts reflect those found in the course of the investigation. Wherever possible, we have sought to have corroboration, particularly in cases where there might be a sanction attached to the particular behavior. The conclusions or finding reflect the Commission's assessment of the evidence, of what the evidence has shown. They are, by their nature, judgmental, and they were not intended to be ambiguous in any way. The recommendations, on the other hand, reflect proper application of the World Anti-Doping Code, and in certain cases where sanctions may be appropriate, and in others, the identification of opportunities to achieve and improve code compliance and to contribute to the fight against doping in sport. I should also say that the findings and the recommendations reflect the unanimous view of this Commission. It's our hope that the parties affected by the recommendations will accept them in the spirit in which they're made, including WADA itself. And a special word, if I may, regarding the Russian Federation. Since Russia is the particular country involved in the matters investigated by the Commission, I think it's appropriate to say that the Commission organized a special meeting with the Russian Minister of Sport, Vitaly Mutko, and in the course of that meeting he invited the Commission to make recommendations that would enable him to ensure that Russia contributed to doping-free sport as an important sport country. We indicated that we would try to frame recommendations that would enable him to do that, but we advised the minister in advance that he would not likely be pleased with many of the findings made in the course of our investigation. And those he's going to have to live with. What we hope is that Russia will seize the opportunity to move forward and to take a lead in attacking a problem that has the potential to destroy sport. So with that backswing, ladies and gentlemen, we are all ready to try to answer any questions you may have. Ben will direct the traffic, but if you could make a point of identifying yourself and your organization, that would be helpful to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dick. If we can take first questions from the floor, and we're then going to interchangeably go to our conference call to take any questions from the line as well. So first question, please, Dan Rowan.
Hi, Dan Rowan, BBC News. How do you feel personally about what you've discovered? Sorry, Dan Rowan, BBC News. Dick, how do you feel personally about what you've discovered during this investigation, and where do you think it ranks in the history of sports scandals?
Well, it's pretty disturbing, you know, and the particular advantage we had in this is that we were not dealing with a he said, she said kind of thing. We actually had documents and recordings and witness statements and so forth to deal with. It's disappointing to see the nature and the extent of what was going on. And to reach the conclusion that it could not possibly have happened without everybody knowing about it or consenting to it. So it's worse than we thought. It has the effect, unlike other forms of corruption, of actually affecting the results on the field of play, and that athletes are both in Russia and abroad are suffering as a result of that. So the opportunity to acknowledge that it exists, and it may be a residue of the old Soviet Union system. It exists. Let's stop it, and let's make a new start. Is there? As I said earlier, I really hope that Russia takes that on board in that light.
Yes, gentleman on the third row, just on the left-hand side.
Yes, sir. Jamil Shade from Brazil. Two questions. First, on the Olympics next year, what do you expect to be the participation of Russia? What do you recommend in this case? And secondly, are the athletes the victims, or are they part of the problem as well? Thank you.
Well, for 2016, our recommendation is that the Russian Federation be suspended. In fact, one of our hopes is that they will volunteer that so they can undertake the remedial work in time to make sure that Russian athletes can compete under a new framework, if you like. If they don't, then it has to play itself out, and the outcome may be that there are no Russian track and field athletes in Rio. I hope that they get they recognize that it's time to change and make those changes. The athletes are, technically the athletes have always been the ones that got caught. They're the ones that have had the doping substances in their systems. In many cases, it's part of a system where they have no practical choice. If they want to participate and have access to coaching, you follow the regime or you're out. And you can be left out just generally, or you can be left out under some prejudice. And so they're part of the problem, but it's not a problem they created.
Next question from Steve Scott, please, and then we'll go to Mark Daly.
Steve Scott, ITV News. Dick, what do you think would be the perception or the fallout if Russia did go ahead and was allowed to compete at the Olympics next year?
Well, if they do the surgery and do the therapy, I hope they can get there and compete. The idea is not to exclude people from the Olympics if you possibly can avoid that. But sometimes, if the conduct is such and it's not corrected, that's the price you pay for it. What I hope is they'll say, okay, this is an opportunity to get rid of that old system, get rid of all of the old coaches, and change our ways, and be a leader. We should be good enough to compete without cheating. I would think so. We got the best part of a year now. I mean, if they start right now, rather than fighting tooth and nail, step by step, I think they could do it. I hope they can.
Mark Daly.
Mark Daly, BBC Newsnight. Dick, the current president of the IAAF, Sebastian Coe, called a recent bit of investigative journalism into athletics a declaration of war on his sport. He yesterday said that he was in the dark about the extent of the corruption within the IAAF. He also said he wasn't in favour of a ban on Russia. Is Sebastian Coe the right man to lead the IAAF out of this mess?
I think he is, and I think you have to draw a line between pre-election and post-election conduct and sayings. Yes, my guess is that he is taken unaware. We were too, I must say. Some of the things we found were nasty surprises to us, and I think that Seb Coe is somebody who can grasp this and be transformational enough to bring about some change in athletics. I hope so, because his sport is at risk if he doesn't.
Next question from David Walsh, Sunday Times.
Dick, your report shows us that the Russian anti-doping agency was involved in the conspiracy, that the Russian anti-doping lab was involved in aiding doping, that the Russian Federation was involved. How can this not be described as state-supported doping?
Well, as I mentioned, our conclusion was that all of this could not have happened and continue to happen without the knowledge of and either actual or implied consent of the state authorities. They were not operating sport, but as I say, they would certainly have known and could not have known about this.
Would you describe it as state-supported doping?
In the sense of consenting to it and allowing it, yes. I don't think there's any other possible conclusion.
Yes, Owen Gibson from the Guardian newspaper.
Dick, if Russia doesn't step forward now and voluntarily agree to suspend itself, if you like, from international athletics competition, what would you like to see the IOC and the IAAF do next? What practically can happen?
I think what we would want to see is the IAAF will suspend the Russian Federation. The IOC will be aware of that. The Russian National Olympic Committee will be aware of it, and if they all do their jobs, no entries would be accepted in the Olympics from that federation, proposed by and supported by the National Olympic Committee. That's what's supposed to happen.
Peter Leisel, ZDF German Television. I think you have just answered a part of my question. What has the IAAF and when can they say that Russia is suspended in, for example, the Olympic Games in Rio? The next session, or will they have a next session, or will they have something out of the ordinary?
My guess is they'd have to do something out of the ordinary. I don't know what their schedule of meetings is and whether they require a council decision or a full congressional decision, but they're going to have to act quickly.
Yes, Duncan McKay on the right-hand side, please.
Duncan McKay, Inside the Games. Dick, you talk about the judgment integrity were compromised by the surveillance of the FSB within the laboratory during the Sochi Winter Olympic Games. How confident can we be that the results in Sochi were true and that they weren't cover-ups there?
I don't think we can be confident that there was no manipulation, Duncan, but we don't have any hard evidence that there was. We simply know that they were there, and it's hard to imagine what the Russian state interest in athletes' urine would be.
We'll take one more question from the floor, and then we'll go on to our conference call and then come back to the audience here in Geneva.
Hi, Dick. Matt Lawson from the Daily Mail. If you think people were complicit all the way to the very top, be it in the sport or indeed in government in Russia, who do you actually trust to perform the rebuilding? Like, who do you actually, who do you entrust with that job?
Well, it's a combination of trust plus verify, to go back to the nuclear days. The minister, he's frustrated to some degree. He certainly knew what was going on. They all knew that the coaches were somewhat out of control. They all knew that the coaches' view was that the role of the National Anti-Doping Organization and the National Federation was to protect their athletes rather than to make sure that they were doping-free. So I think that he recognizes that. He knows that there will be a fair amount of condemnation of the conduct to date, but we have given him the opportunity that he asked for. That will be combined with a pretty careful monitoring of what is done. I mean, from the accreditation of any new laboratory, we've recommended, as you probably saw, that the director of the laboratory be removed from his position, that the WADA accreditation be withdrawn, so they're going to have to start all over again. In the meantime, all their samples will have to be analyzed out of the country. As far as RUSADA is concerned, there will be a very careful supervision of its activities, its test distribution plans, the appointment of doping control officers. All of that will be monitored very closely by WADA before it would be willing to declare the organization code compliant. So there'll be a lot of supervision in that area by the independent agency that's responsible for monitoring code compliance.
Okay, we'll now take some questions from our conference call. So if I can ask the operator to channel through any questions from the phone line, and then we'll come back to the audience here.
For questions, press star 1. And our first question comes from Martin Ziegler. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Pound, Martin Ziegler here. What about the involvement of Vitaly Mutka, the sports minister? Do you believe he knew what was going on? Because you said this is state-sponsored.
Well, you can't fix him with on any documentary basis with that knowledge. But the extent of what was going on was so prevalent that in our conclusion it was not possible for him to be unaware of it. And if he was aware of it, then he's complicit in it. That's our inference from all of the evidence that we actually had a chance to examine.
Thanks.
Next question from the call, please.
Our next question comes from Stephen Selthofer. Please go ahead.
Oh, yes, Mr. Pound. This is Steve Selthofer from ABA. If an athlete is a whistleblower and sends incriminating information, let's say if they have knowledge of the problems in Russia, did you ever receive anything at WADA about those problems over the years when you were president, or afterwards, all the way up through 2009?
When I was president, we were just getting started on this, and my guess is that our staff would have received some, and they would have tried to figure out how to act upon it, to make some assessment as to whether it was credible evidence, and if so, what to do with it. Since that time, WADA's instituted a call-in helpline for athletes, and I think one of the areas in which it needs to improve is as to how to deal with the information that it gets. It's not one of these things where if you hear that RUSADA is non-compliant in some respect, that you call up RUSADA and say, by the way, Yevgeny has just called us to say that you're non-compliant. I mean, that kind of discourages anyone from calling. So one of the recommendations that we've made for WADA is to get better organized at how to deal with this. Ideally, the International Federation should have an ombudsperson or a compliance officer who could be contacted. The National Anti-Doping Organization should have a possibility of hearing about non-compliant behavior by coaches and other athletes, and in a receptive, encouraging way, so that you're not putting your athletic future or your personal safety at risk by informing on conduct that is contrary to the code.
Next question.
I mean, yes, because that's pretty much what is at the center. I just went through the transcript today, and when you were mentioning retaliation and things like this, I mean, apparently at the ADR piece, I mean, if we go through it, we're talking about death threats, possibly athletes, that may have been, the retaliation against them, it's not even what we want to talk about here, think about. And, I'm concerned with how that information, if an athlete sends information to WADA, what did they do with it? Did they send it back to the International Sport Federation, the IAAF? Did they send that back to the National Olympic Committee of Russia, or to the Russian track and field, the National Federation there?
I think that probably involves an assessment on a case-by-case basis, but yes, you don't want to encourage any retaliation, and as you know, the balance of power between a whistleblower who may be caught in the system in some way and the system itself is out of all proportion. The power of the National Federation compared to, say, a single athlete is just enormous. So that's part of the reluctance that whistleblowers have, and we've seen it in other sports where basically the system tends to be harder on the whistleblower than it is on the perpetrators.
The way it was for me, I tried informing you in WADA about Deutsche Telekom, Team Telecom, and I know where I got with that, absolutely zero. So anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Pound.
We'll take two more questions from the call and then come back to the audience here in Geneva.
And our next question comes from Michael Heinz. Please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. This is Michael Heinz calling from Berlin. Mr. Pound, I have two questions. First is a question of understanding. Did I get that right? The wave of positive tests in Russian athletics this last year, did that turn up because of your involvement there and your commission pushing all these tests through? And the second question is a bit broader. Everybody talks in a case like that of the tip of the iceberg. Probably you exposed the iceberg a little more than it ever had been. Anyway, do you have this feeling you should conduct a similar inquiry that tackles different other federations and other countries?
Well, I hope that some other independent commission will do that. We feel we've kind of done our job for the moment, but tip of the iceberg, I'm afraid you're probably right. As I say, we certainly do not think that Russia is the only country with a doping problem, and we don't think that athletics is the only sport with a doping problem. Now, the first point, the connection wasn't good enough for me to catch what you were after on the first question. So, do you want to try that in a shorter fashion?
Excuse me, probably my English. The wave of positive tests in Russian athletics this year, is that probably due to your involvement, the involvement of your commission in these tests being pushed through?
You mean in the reporting of those to WADA and getting the information on the system? Probably.
Yes. Actually, the question is, would these tests have been positive without your involvement?
I can't answer that question. I don't know whether they would have or not. I mean, one of our big concerns about tests were the 1,400 that were destroyed by the director of the Moscow laboratory, despite a specific request from WADA that those be retained, and WADA was about to visit Moscow and the lab, and they arrived to find that the weekend before they arrived, the director had gone to the lab and destroyed 1,400 tests. That was a problem for us.
Yeah, that answers the question quite. Thank you.
Okay, last question from the call, please.
And our last question is from Wakako Yuki. Please go ahead.
Hello, Dick. It's Wakako Yuki from the Yomiuri Shimbun. Hello, can you hear me?
Barely.
Okay, good. I'll try to say. Ed, this is tip of iceberg, and probably this is not only Russia, this is not only track and field. Does that mean, as former WADA chairperson, current anti-doping system cannot crack the depth of the darker world once state or Rahman cover-up is there and no one would speak up? Also, where does that put the credibility of sport? Thank you.
The presidency of what?
Credibility
of sport.
of sport?
I'm sorry. No,
yeah.
Well, I think the credibility of sport has taken some fairly serious body blows in the last few months. With FIFA and its particular forms of corruption, and now the IAAF. These are two of the most important sports in the world, and the difficulty for all of us involved in sport is that it doesn't just stop there. The public opinion is going to move towards the view that all sport is corrupt, and that certainly affects the credibility of sport. The actions we found here, as I say, that affect the outcome of competitions on the field of play are particularly serious. If you can't believe those results, then it's a serious credibility problem for that sport and by implication for other sports as well. So this is something that I hope will cause all sports to take a look at their governance and the application of their anti-doping rules because their very existence may be at risk.
Okay, we'll come back to the audience here in Geneva, and the gentleman on the third row on the right-hand side, please.
Marc Ventouillac, l'équipe. Two questions. The first one, when you spoke about the sample destroyed by the director of Moscow laboratory, it's just sample for athletics or for many sport? And my second question, what will be happen now? Your report will be examined by WADA and the decision will be taken in the next few days, next few weeks. What happened exactly?
Yes, the samples would have been samples at the laboratory, so it may have likely was spread across many sports, not just athletics. As far as our report is concerned, one of the reasons that we pushed to get it out today is that next week the WADA Foundation Board and Executive Committee will be meeting in Colorado Springs, and we wanted to have this report in their hands at that time because we think these are questions that need to be dealt with urgently, and I'm assuming that. Normally the way it works is the executive board considers it, makes a recommendation, and the foundation board will decide what should be done. Yes, and the foundation board meetings, as those of you who follow this will know, are open to the public and to the media. So you're able to follow the discussion if you wish to be there.
Yeah. Catherine Fiancon for France 24. Follow up to the question of my colleague, I would like to know when these samples have been, these tests have been destroyed, and when have you been to Russia and you met the minister, or did you meet the minister of sport somewhere else than in his country?
Okay, I'm going to ask Günter Younger to give you the date and the circumstances of the destruction, and I'll deal with the other question.
So the samples were destroyed in December 2014 when WADA requested to store the whole amount of samples, and then it was reported as 1,417 were destroyed by the laboratory.
Next question from David Walsh, please.
Yeah.
Second.
We met the minister on neutral territory. That is to say, in Switzerland, in September, and it was a meeting. It was an interesting meeting because he came without the usual staff that hangs on to ministers to make sure they don't say anything that they don't know about, and so it was quite a candid discussion, and we wanted to invite him to say anything that he had to say, and then we said, now look. Here's where we're headed. This is the kind of information we have. You're not going to like it, but we will try to put recommendations in place that if you follow them, you can become code compliant.
Sorry, Dick, David Walsh from the Sunday Times. You've mentioned that Russia is now, you've said, the report says that Russia is non-compliant, therefore it's banned, and it's got to get its house in order. And that will, it'll have to be verified. I get all that. But where is the punishment here? Where is somebody saying, because you have supported an appalling system of corruption, you are now going to be suspended for a certain period, and regardless of when you get your house in order, you're going to be out of competition until that time? Because that's what people would expect.
Well, if they're suspended, they're out of competition until they're unsuspended.
Yes, but if they come back in 3 months' time and say, look, we've got everything in order now and you can verify it, well, then would they be entitled to come back in 3 months?
If they can get all that done in 3 months and we're satisfied that they've got it done, yeah. I mean, we're trying to be, what we really want to encourage is compliance with the code. We don't have it now. So, I mean, their lab is gone, their National Anti-Doping Organization is gone. We've recommended that the Russian Athletics Federation be suspended. They're gone, assuming the powers that be follow those recommendations. And then they say, if you want to get back, here's the road back. And you've got to satisfy WADA, and you've got to satisfy your international federation and everybody else that you've done this and that you are doing it.
Do you think there's a minimum amount of time that would be needed to get that work done?
Probably, I would think it would take several months at least. Several months. I mean, this is not easy. You're not going to have a lab by then, for sure. But you can certainly make your NADO, your National Anti-Doping Organization, compliant, and you can probably fight your way back into compliance as a federation within the IAAF. But it's not a free ride. It's not going to be one of these things where you get a letter from the minister saying, okay, it's all done. And in the meantime, there are a lot of, as you read the recommendation, there are a lot of follow-ups that have to be done. And there are a lot of people that are going to have to walk the plank before all this happens.
Sir, Gu Dunyu from China Xinhua News Agency. I have a bit of a general question. Were you able to identify in your investigation how long the widespread corruption and doping have been going on in Russia?
No, I mean we sort of picked up an investigation at a certain time. We're going to be looking at part 2 of the IAAF thing. May go back to as far as 2001, but it was a much narrower period. Our guess, and it's only a guess, is that this is an inherited attitude that came from the old Cold War days in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
And would results from previous international sports events be affected if, as you said, this turns out to be the case?
Well, some of them already have been. You know, I mean, sanctions have been imposed and medals withdrawn and so on. But the real tough thing is that where there's money prizes involved, usually the money's gone, and whoever ought to have won may not get what he or she ought to have got.
Thank you.
Next question, Dan King, please.
Dick, Dan King from The Sun. Given, as you say, the narrow focus of this particular investigation, what effect did this conspiracy have specifically on the results at the London 2012 Olympics in track and field? And sort of following my colleague's point, how should fans of athletics look at the results over the last 10, 20 years? What kind of respect or credibility can they pay to any of those results?
Well, I think a lot of these things will have question marks attached to them. I mean, I can remember 15 years ago sitting in the stands at athletics in Sydney and looking on each event. They had the top 25 performances of all time, and it was astonishing how many of them went back to the 1960s. Absolutely astonishing, and that was the height of doping. So I think that in some respects there has been an impact of anti-doping rules. I'm always struck by going to the throwing events, for example, and looking at the tapes that have the world record and the Olympic record and national record or whatever it is, and see how far short a lot of the throws are now coming. So there's been some impact.
Sorry, specifically on London 2012, I think you talked somewhere in the summaries about something, a degree of sabotage, that because of the failure to follow up on and delays in following up positive tests or covering up positive tests, that people were allowed to compete and that thereby sabotaged London 2012.
Yeah, in a sense, the question is whether allowing people to compete that perhaps ought not to have resulted in some kind of a sabotage of some of the events in London, and the answer to that is yes. It's probably right.
Graham Dunbar, please.
Hi. Graham Dunbar from the Associated Press. Mr. Pound, some of the things you've touched upon, state-supported cheating, Russian officials destroying evidence, Mr. Mutko at the centre of this. Those of us who cover FIFA will find some of these things quite familiar. Do you think anything that you've found, or anything in your report, should call the integrity of Russia hosting the 2018 World Cup into question? Do they deserve to still be able to go ahead with that, given what we've learned from your report?
Well, look, we had a very narrow mandate. I mean, it's not for us to extrapolate to other sports and other events. So we were to look at athletics and the Russian Federation, and that's pretty well it. I think FIFA's got to sort out its own difficulties without our help.
We'll take one more question from the floor, and then we'll go back to our conference call, please.
Yuki Oba from NHK Japan Broadcasting. Mr. Pound, what was the actual number of the doping that the IC managed to identify, or at least the scale of the number by the Russian athletes? And can you surely say that there is no more of that going on right now in Russia?
Well, it's easy to answer the last question. No, I can't assure you at all. I mean, their conduct up to and including the summer of this year, indicated otherwise. Which? Oh, I think we had, is it 8 sanction packages not previously identified, and a number of other suspicious things that need to be followed up.
Okay, we'll return to our conference call for any more questions and then come back to the floor again. So any questions on the call, please?
We have Brian Fogel online. Please go ahead.
Hi, Dick. Wanted to ask a general question on WADA's plan for going back and retesting samples. You know, I think what we're seeing, of course, as you're saying, is the tip of the iceberg. And, you know, I'm wondering, of course, guys like Victor Conti have been saying for years that we got to go back and test. And I'm wondering how far and how deep with this information, even excluding Russia, are you guys going to go back and start retesting samples out of Jamaica, Kenya, other Olympic Games? What is there a plan? And if so, what do you think is going to be gained by it?
I don't think there's a plan yet. I think I hope the outcome of our investigation that shows that it's likely far more widespread than anyone believed will lead to plans. The only organization I know that actually keeps samples for a long-term basis is the IOC. Most other testing agencies, you know, the analysis is done. If it's not a positive test, the sample's kept for a number of months, but then normally are routinely destroyed. So if you want them kept, the testing agency, which is the responsible authority, has to request the lab to keep the samples. So yes, the IOC, I think, will be far more alert to the fact that there could have been substances that were not detectable in, let's say, in London in 2012, but could be now. And they will go back and test, as they have done, perhaps not to the extent that many would prefer, but they've certainly done it.
Next question from the call.
And do you see that that there will be a lot of positives that come out of retesting, and how will that affect the various sports?
As to the number that'll be found, hard to say. You know, the advantage is that you know by now who the athletes were and what sports they participated in, and therefore you can assess a high or a low risk of doping and focus on the areas where the risk is higher. Maybe the countries from which the athletes come, the risk is higher. And that's sort of how you do your testing, retesting of these samples. But to pick a percentage is beyond my expertise.
Okay, next question from the call, please.
Our next question comes from Larry Eder. Please go ahead.
Mr. Pound, my question is, in countries such as Kenya and Ethiopia, where they haven't developed consistent testing, what are your thoughts on their programs?
Well, it seems pretty clear from both the ARD program and subsequent developments that Kenya has a real problem. It's been very slow to acknowledge that there's a problem. There is apparently some kind of an investigation going on as we speak. The terms of reference are not known to me, nor are the particular individuals who are investigating it. But if they don't do a good job, then I think somebody else will do a job for them.
Thank you.
Next question from the call.
And we have Stephen Selthofer online. Please go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Pound. How would you feel about grading your work, WADA's work, over the last 10 years now in light of everything that's transpired?
I would say that we've made a lot of progress where progress prior to that time would not have been possible. I do think that we've been a little diffident in using our muscle. We've spent most of our time trying to persuade people to become code compliant, but you know, we've now got 11 or 12 years of experience with a code, and if you haven't become code compliant over that period of time, that indicates to me that you're not trying very hard, and therefore, instead of the carrot, we need the stick. And so I think that we need to use our power to declare code non-compliance with a little more confidence. And I think as a result of this report, and one of the recommendations being that those decisions be taken away from the political table, that is to say the foundation board and the executive committee, put in the hands of a compliance committee that will report to those committees on whether or not there is in fact compliance. At that point, it's very hard for the I call them the political bodies, not to act. And so I think we'll find more of that in future, and I think that's really what's required.
Two more questions from the call, and then we'll come back to the audience.
Will others outside be able to contribute to your recommendations on how to go about it for WADA or the International Federation?
I think WADA would welcome any suggestions from anybody. There's no monopoly on good ideas, and certainly the universe is bigger than the foundation board and the WADA executive committee. So anybody who has some ideas, I'm sure the receipt of those would be most welcome. So encourage anyone you know to do that.
That's very good to hear. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Last question from the call, and then we'll come back to the audience in Geneva.
We have Mark Bitton online. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mark Bitton from Around Rings. I wonder how you compare this scandal with that of the Salt Lake City scandal, which you were involved in the cleanup of that particular scandal some 15 years ago. How does it compare with Salt Lake City and also the current FIFA scandal? And secondly, should Russia be prevented from bidding for any more sports events until it gets its house in order? Thank you.
Well, there are rules that prevent non-code compliant countries from bidding for events, including the Olympic Games. I think the comparison with the IOC's problem in Salt Lake City and this are really quite different. There, we had a governance problem with some of our members who either didn't know or didn't care what was unacceptable conduct that put our organization in a bad light and had to be dealt with accordingly. But they did not have an impact on the public perception of the value of the Olympic Games and the support of the athletes who are training for those games and competing in them. It was a difficult time for the IOC, but not for the athletes and not for the sports.
Okay, next question, please.
Fatih Eral, Anadolu Agency. I know you don't like to go to details of specific cases, but today's WADA report was expected to outline the case of Turkish athlete Aslı Çakır Alptekin. I didn't check the report well, but according to early reports, the Turkish runner was forced to pay to get a positive test, and it was sort of blackmail, and she refused to do so. What do we know about it at this moment? Thank you.
We don't know as much as we want. We know that there was a problem with her, and I think that is something that is currently probably being investigated by the French authorities. Their examination, has already sped from France to Singapore and probably to Turkey and possibly to Russia. So it remains to be seen. It's one of the reasons that we thought we should keep from commenting on the criminal aspects of things until they decide what to do.
Yes, next question, please. The lady on the right.
Hi, Chelsea Little, fasterskier.com. You say that you don't believe that athletics is the only sport that has a problem. I'd like to ask you specifically about other endurance sports. For instance, in cross-country skiing and biathlon, there's been quite a lot of blood doping by Russia, including in the lead up to the 2014 Olympics. And then the coach working with those athletes was actually promoted within the national team. It was hard for observers at the time not to suspect systematic state-sponsored doping, but we felt like we couldn't say that because there was no investigation. Would you now say that those suspicions are well-grounded?
Well, certainly the coaching element in the sport that we examined was very important and very complicit. And they did all sorts of things to try and confound efforts to do out-of-competition testing. And I mean, it extended to denying that athletes were present at a particular training facility when we knew they were, to using false identities when they were traveling abroad. So whether that was confined to athletics or not, don't know. But certainly the two sports you mentioned, cross-country skiing and biathlon, are known to have had a lot of doping problems, and probably not just Russia.
Yes, next question from the gentleman at the back.
Konstantin Pributkov, TASS News Agency. Is the Independent Commission ready to present proofs on every conclusion of which is mentioned in the report?
Well, we have seen enough evidence to reach those conclusions. This is a summary. We would need a cubic meter or so if we were going to bring all of the stuff that we have. But you know, we've been very careful not to reach a conclusion if we weren't certain of it. And you'll see in the report there are certain cases where, you know, on our own initiative, we don't think there's enough to lead to a sanction. And where we found that, we've tried to be fair about reaching definitive conclusions.
Dick, Matt Lawson again from the Mail. You've complained many times in the past about a lack of investment in anti-doping programs around the world, a lack of funding. You've credited a German journalist with actually leading WADA to this investigation. Doesn't your investigation expose just how little funding there is and how insufficient it is? And if today is going to be a game changer, as Richard McLaren has called it, hasn't the game got to change in terms of the amount of funding and investment in catching these people?
Well, I would love to be a fly on the wall of the WADA Executive Committee next Tuesday in Colorado Springs. The foundation board members and executive committee members have a copy of this report. They got it a couple of hours ahead of the press conference. I think it's a pretty damning indictment of what has not been done. And it points the way to things that can be done if we're going to get serious about this. Now, at some point, the Olympic movement, which funds half of WADA, and the governments, which fund the other half, have to say, are we going to do this properly, or should we all go home? And we shall see.
David Walsh.
If I could address this to Richard McLaren, because Richard, you did make the point about this report being a game changer. A lot of people are going to hear what's going on today and think that what's going to happen here is Russia going to be banned, and the ban is going to end just before the Olympics, because that's how sports works, and the IOC's commercial interests transcends its values and the reasons why the Olympic movement started in the first place. What's your feeling about that perception?
Well, the problem here, I think, is that you have corporate corruption, governance corruption, and then on top of that, you have the doping corruption, and you put the two together and you change the results on the field of competition. And this commission doesn't have the authority to pursue any particular aspect of its recommendations. It's up to others to do that. We're simply identifying where things need to be looked at, changed, and make our recommendations. Others have to carry them out.
Let me take off my independent commission hat and put on my IOC hat here. Our commercial interests do not transcend the underlying values. If the Russian Track and Field Federation is non-compliant, it will not be able to enter athletes in the games. That's all there is to it. And before it can become compliant, you'll see in the recommendations that it would only be pursuant to a confirmation by WADA giving reasons. So I don't. We're not. The IOC is not going to sell out the athletes that need to be protected.
But just on that, David, what about then saying that the magnitude of this corruption has been so deep that we need a suspension that really hurts here? In other words, Russia are not going to the Olympics in Rio because they've abused their position. Why not go for that?
Why go for that if you can achieve the result you're looking for, which is compliance, without having to do that? I mean, that's your nuclear weapon. Say, either get this done, or you're not going to be in Rio. Face it. I mean, the embarrassment to Russia of something like that is such that if it happened in my country, we would get it done. We did that after Ben Johnson in 1988. We did a complete about face. So I'm all for an eye and an eye for an eye, but the idea here is to get people competing under the right conditions. And if you can get Russia to take the lead and show that even a suspension can even affect a country as important as Russia, then you get the other countries, some of which are named in the report, that will say, there, but for the grace of God go I, maybe we better get this act together.
George.
We'll see.
George Arbuthnot, Sunday Times. You mentioned your concerns about Kenya, Dick. What is in the remit of the second part of your investigation based on the blood data analysis by ARD and the Sunday Times? Could other countries be judged to be non-compliant?
They might be. I mean, we haven't done our full analysis of the data, but that analysis may point us in that direction, and if so, we will certainly say so, even though our remit is to comment on whether the IAAF acted properly in the circumstances.
Yes, next question to the left here.
Sorry. Jamil Shad again from Brazil. My question is on the embarrassment, let's say, of this situation. Yes, to the Russian situation, but over and over we've been told by the IOC that they're fighting hard against doping. Every single Olympics we go to several press conferences stating exactly this. And then we find out that actually a journalist found out what you're now finding out. How much of embarrassment is to the IOC itself that actually the situation did not come from inside? And secondly, in the run-up to the Olympics in Rio, we've seen in Brazil not only the lab being disaccredited, but also a number of doping cases, suspicions. How much does that is a concern that Brazil could be, let's say, preparing itself for a good ranking in the Olympic medal position? Thank you.
Well, I mean, certainly every country that is a host country tries to do its best at home. We certainly did. The British certainly did for 2012 and so forth. But the laboratory, we revoked the accreditation of it. It simply was not performing at a level that could give you confidence in the results that it was publishing. So that I don't think it's going to be ready, but I don't know. I'm not aware of the thing. In terms of the doping, there will certainly be a lot more targeting of Brazilian athletes if there's a suspicion that that's going on. And so the international federations will do the same thing. The IOC can do that in the pre-games testing. WADA is entitled to test. The international federations can test. Nobody wants the results of the competitions to be altered as a result of doping. We're just not very good at catching people yet. Well, I think as far as the IOC is concerned, I mean, the only time we can actually control the situation is during that Olympic Games period, the opening of the village till the closing. At all other times, the athletes compete under the control of their international or national federations. I am pretty satisfied that the analysis that's done at Olympic Games is state of the art, and we certainly don't cover up. When Ben Johnson was found positive, the #1 event, the #1 athlete, a world record, he was positive. He was out, but we don't cover them up. So I would say if there's an embarrassment, it should go back to the international federations. It should be their responsibility to keep their sport clean.
Matt Dickinson.
Dick, on the back of that, you've said previously that the gravest threat to anti-doping is the human factor and the corruption rather than the science and the chemicals. How much does this report almost confirm that view, and then therefore how much harder is it to make anti-doping more effective?
Well, certainly in this case, it was not, the science was not bad. I mean, I think we found very few analytical errors in coming out of the Moscow lab. There were a few where they could have detected at a certain minimum level that is required for accreditation, but say the lab in Lausanne was actually more sophisticated and can find lower concentrations. But in terms of straight faulty analysis, aside from one test this summer where the A and the B didn't match, I don't think we found that. Our problem was the people hiding samples or altering them or losing them or substituting for them in return for cash. That's where it broke down. Once again, the people broke down, not the system.
Question from Matt Magendi.
Yeah, Dick, how much is this just the tip of the iceberg and that this will lead to a cavalcade of things for other nations, other sports? Are you hopeful that this is going to be groundbreaking in that sense, that this is just the beginning of how bad it's going to get for maybe sport globally?
Yes. I mean, I think WADA has in the interest of generating consensus among all the stakeholders, has been far too easy in allowing organizations to self-assess as to whether they're compliant. Do you have rules? Yes, tick, aha. Do you conduct out-of-competition tests? Tick, yes. Do you have in-competition tests? Yes. Okay, you're compliant. And so it's just a numbers game, and I think we're changing that to making sure that the testing that's done is not just a quantitative assessment, but a qualitative. How are you designing your test distribution plan? What sports? What athletes? I think one of the things that we found in the commission was the entire teams seem to be able to avoid out-of-competition testing. That's not good, especially in, as it turns out, in race walking, for example, where there were far too many disqualifications anyway, let alone what wasn't tested for.
Owen Gibson.
Owen Gibson from The Guardian again. Two very quick questions. One, if Russia does prove that it's compliant in the way that David describes and comes back to compete in Russia, how can we be sure that athletes who haven't benefited from these years of systemic doping aren't still benefiting? That's one question. And secondly, without going into the specifics of the IAAF criminal case, which I know you're not able to do before the second part is published, but how much of an indictment is this on the on that period of that international federation, and having looked into this in such detail, how damning should we be of those that led the sport for that period?
I think it's very damaging. It confirms what everybody suspected, that they were doing it. We weren't, of course. They were. But as I say, we were in the happy position as a result of the documentary and subsequent evidence that we discovered of getting beyond the suspicion stage, getting beyond the rumor stage, and saying, look, this is actual proof that it was going on. And so as an indictment of the old Cold War days, it's exactly what you would think. And the IAAF did some good things early on, and but has not followed up in the way that we might have hoped, that athletes and the public might have hoped. And so the answer is to identify that and call a spade and say, all right, you've got to fix this up or your sport is in real trouble. And you'd think they would know that themselves, but they don't seem to.
Oui, Michel Ditria de la radio.
Sorry, that's that first question about the idea that Russian athletes might be competing in
Yeah, sorry, my fault. I think that if you thought you were dealing with major steroid programs, probably. Blood doping is something that can go up and down, and I think the long-term benefit is either nil or rather minor. And I think the athlete biological passport will help identify those, the likelihood of doping. So we're getting there, a lot more slowly than one would like, but now with some of these statistical tools available, it's going to make it somewhat easier.
Oui, Michel Ditria de la radio-télévision suisse. À la page 33 de votre rapport, Monsieur Pound, vous écrivez que le laboratoire lausannois antidopage, vous parlez le français, je vous pose la question en français.
J'espère.
Quelle est l'implication du laboratoire lausannois par rapport aux échantillons russes? Je n'arrive pas très bien à comprendre à la page 33 de votre rapport.
We had the same problem, as you can see from the report. We got an explanation as to how it is that these samples got destroyed, and we're not sure we believe it, but there's something that we haven't got. We couldn't find any evidence of complicity with anything, but we didn't believe the explanation. Sometimes you start a line of inquiry and you come to a dead end, and we came to a dead end, but we wanted to make sure that everybody knew we weren't entirely satisfied with the explanation we got.
David Walsh.
Dick. We should get out of here. Sorry, yeah.
Sir.
I think, Dick, if I were a Russian athletic enthusiast sitting here, I would say I understand totally why we've been declared non-compliant, and I accept our punishment in relation to that. But given, especially the information you've passed on to the French police, how can we not be talking about the IAAF being non-compliant? Why are they not non-compliant, but Russia is?
An interesting question. I mean, it was systemic. In the IAAF, we think, from what we know, that it was not IAAF. It was some rogue activities on the part of individuals within it. And there's whether that's a distinction without a difference or not, I don't know. But I don't think that was IAAF policy, whereas we believe it was close to a policy level in Russian sport.
Two more questions from the floor. George.
Hi, Dick. In your report, it says you have evidence that other sports were involved in doping, especially in Russia. Will you be seeking an extension of the WADA remit to pursue that evidence?
No, we're not in a generate work for ourselves mode. If WADA is concerned about that, it will decide what to do and whether it warrants an investigation, in which case we will probably be well out of town by then.
Okay, last question, please.
Xavier Deleu from Arte TV. Given the extent of the cheating in Russian sports that is shown in your report, how come more athletes from Russia were not positive in international competition like Olympic Games and so on?
Well, the suspicion is that before the athletes are allowed to leave the country, they get tested to make sure that they're not positive. And we had reports of athletes in London going back to Moscow to be tested and then came back to London when it was clear. And that's been a feature of starting in the old Soviet days that they never tested positive in competition. What you have to watch for as indications of possible doping is reported injuries, reported illnesses, that sort of thing that are that may not be the real explanation as to why an athlete is not participating.
Is it just this, or is it just also the sign of a more general failure in testing of athletes?
You mean when you come to the competitions and
yes.
Well, there, basically, those of you who are familiar with doping in sport, if you fail an in-competition doping test, you fail the doping test and you fail an IQ test. You know when the test is going to occur and you're still positive? I mean, hello? So I think you'll find that true of almost all countries.
Thank you very much. That does conclude today's press
conference. Thank you, folks, for being here, and thank you for your interest in the problems.
Thank you very much.